Welcome to this first session of the ACM Hangouts hosted by Arts Council Malta. This is what this session is going to be about.
New photos of Alec Baldwin seen sharing an embrace with the family of cinematographer Helena Hutchins, killed Thursday on a New Mexico movie set.
The tragedy on the set of Rust, which claimed the life of cinematographer Helena Hutchins, has shocked the entire world and launched an important debate about the risks involved and about health and safety measures in the cultural and creative industries. In this session, we will be discussing the implications of such accidents and possible reasons leading to these unfortunate events. Why are they often linked to poor working conditions, and what should be standard practice in this case? How can health and safety measures be an integral part of projects and plans? Joining us for this session is film producer. She has worked for 15 years in production. Perhaps she is most known at the moment for her recent award-winning film, Lutzu. Rebecca Nastasi, welcome to the ACM Hangouts. And James Tanti, wearing his two hats today as a visual effects producer in the film world. He has also 8 years of experience in this field and also as a board member of Teatru Salesian. Welcome, James.
Thank you.
So today we are going to be discussing a case which has shocked the world, as we have, as per the introduction, a normal day on set which went completely wrong. Actor Alec Baldwin was rehearsing a scene that involved pointing a revolver towards the camera and shooting. He fired the gun, supposedly containing blanks, but as we all know, it was not so, as cinematographer Helena Hutchins was fatally wounded. And director Joel Souza was also injured in this particular accident, a case which is still being investigated, so we're not here obviously discussing the merits of this case. There is no clarity as yet as to what really happened and who was responsible, but naturally we all know that there was this very, very sad consequence. So, Rebecca, James, what was your first reaction to this particular accident when you heard what happened?
Interest, first of all, because I am interested in what's going on sort of internationally on international productions. Obviously, it feels trite to say that it was a tragedy. This is obvious. From what I'm reading and sort of what the conversation has been so far, it seems that it allegedly was a mismanaged set to begin with. There were issues on set, other broader issues to do with working conditions and so on and so forth. It seems they didn't have much of a budget. And it seems that they cut corners, which is obviously, when it comes to health and safety, that is something you should never do.
Yeah.
It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy because, well, someone lost her life. But it's a tragedy because you would expect certain standards in the way you approach production. And this is not a question of being professional or not. I mean, there are ways and means of how to act on set on purpose. There are people responsible for certain things on set on purpose. It's done for a reason. This is not the first time that this has happened on set, unfortunately. So, unfortunately, when it happens, it's a reality check that you cannot cut corners, especially when it comes to health and safety.
Exactly, and you mentioned standards, and in fact, one of the things which really surprised me was the fact that there were actual bullets on set. Now, I'm not an expert in this field, but why would they put people's lives at risk in this way? Why would there be actual bullets on such a set?
Well, the situation is unclear. I don't really know the details, so I can't really pass judgment on that. I have no idea what happened, and I think the investigations are still ongoing, so that's still a big question mark. But there is a chain of command on set, of course, and it seems that there was a communication breakdown from what the investigations have revealed so far.
Yeah, but it is something which can technically be prevented, as in it doesn't necessarily.
There's no need to have live ammunition
there.
on set.
Absolutely not.
Unless you're you have a ball in the air and you're shooting the ball and seeing it, burst. there's no reason why you should have live ammunition on set. I mean, this is a clear case of gross misconduct of one of the people or the people responsible. And yes, the chain of command wasn't followed. I mean, I've seen on the news that people are pinning it on the assistant director, on Alec Baldwin as an actor. He is the producer as well, so he is a very important person when it comes to the decision making. The armorer, the person who apparently doesn't have a lot of experience in as an armorer. I mean,
she's very young as well. 24 years old.
24 years old. Yes. I mean, an HOD, head of department, 24 years old, which isn't bad in itself. But I mean, you working with live ammunition. I mean, you shouldn't be, but you working with firearms on set. You need experience. It's a risk. It's a big risk.
Yes, and this goes back to what I've read in that it seems that what was happening was that they were hiring people who were more inexperienced because they came cheaper, and that is always a danger. You do not want to do that. I mean, the most important thing if you're going to be making a film is choosing the right people and choosing your team adequately. The stronger the team, the more likely you are to succeed without incident. At the end of the day, sets are very dangerous places to be as a standard, even if you don't have live ammunition on set as it seems to be the case. There's heavy equipment, there are many people. So, I mean, it's in and of itself, there are the standards, as James was saying, for things to go smoothly. And it just seems like in this case, allegedly, that those standards weren't followed.
And speaking of roles as well, because you mentioned the Alec Baldwin being also the producer, and the fact his tweets and the messages which he issued after the accident are quite contradictory, are quite confusing. He is saying that they were a very good team, but at the same time he's saying that he doesn't really kind of know or assume any responsibility. So in that case, I mean, Rebecca, as a producer, what's his responsibility or potentially could be in this specific case?
I don't know what his precise role was as a producer, because there are many different types of producers. So it could very well be that he had, well, I wouldn't say no say, but he wasn't really involved in the hiring and logistics and operations of what was going on. But saying that, obviously he is a big star. So if he saw that there were things going which weren't going right and which could be remedied, it would have been in his power to say, stop, let's recalibrate, let's rethink this, and let's do this properly. It would have been within his rights. But I don't know what the thinking was, what the relationships were between the producing team.
That said, a producer is a person who designs the show.
Absolutely.
And I'm pretty sure that he was a very important person, or he is a very important person in the project when designing the show. Now, so a bit of insight also, because I'm going through it as well in my professional life and experience, is that at the moment, so in our industry, the visual effects industry, we have issues with recruitment. So what's happening is COVID has changed the ball game completely. People want to work from home. They do not want to travel. I'm generalizing here because obviously you find people who would want to travel, but people are comfortable working from home. They saw that you can work from home, you can manage to work from home, so they want to work from home. And that obviously limits the amount of people that can be recruited for certain projects. And I know for a fact that COVID, since many sets had to stop during COVID, and now it's coming back to life, it's very hard to find people to work on set. Because there's so much demand, so much work, that it might be a challenge to find people. And it could be that this particular project was suffering the same fate, where it was very difficult to find people to work, so they had to figure out something, because they had contracts with, I think it's ABC, the network that is showing, I'm not sure, but the network that is showing that particular project. I would assume they would have contracts with them that they need to start. I think it started airing already, or it was just about to start airing. So you'd have that pressure coming from one end. The other end is recruitment, trying to find people, and then you end up finding not
Yeah.
finding the right people. I mean,
Like it happened in almost all industries across different industries. So possibly for film, it's kind of the same situation.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. And I would say as well, because in a very recent development, the head of lighting on the film has filed a lawsuit alleging negligence, and also that this accident caused severe emotional distress. And
Of
I think
course.
it's a very
It
natural
would, yes.
reaction to what happened, because he saw the cinematographer die literally like right beside him.
On a film set, the gaffer, who is
Yeah.
the person you mentioned, he or she is the link with the director of photography.
Yeah.
And given
Yeah.
that the director of photography unfortunately passed away, that is very natural. I
Yes.
mean, you cannot have a gaffer and the DOP not working together. So that's something very natural.
Absolutely, and obviously the environment on set, you're working long hours in very stressful environments,
Yeah.
away from family, away from home. The crew become very tightly knit usually, and especially this relationship you're talking about between the gaffer and the DOP, and obviously there are other similar relationships on set. You become like a family completely. Sometimes the people will know more than your immediate family what's going on in your day-to-day life, of course, especially if you're working away from home, if you're working on location in
Exactly.
remote places, right?
Exactly.
So yes, apparently he worked with her on 9 other projects. So they were very close, and I can't even imagine the trauma that he has gone through.
Exactly. And also, I think this makes us reflect about also other accidents, other such happenings. For example, there was recently the Travis Scott's concert at the Astroworld Music Festival that left another 8 victims, several more injured. Naturally, when you're in a live performance setup, then it's not just about the crew or the workers, the team, but also about the audience. James, I mean, you were also part of a board of a theatre, so I think that's one major concern when having such a place, when hosting people in your home.
Public liability.
Exactly.
That is something that. So, yes, I am part of the team that works at Teatro Salesian. I'm a volunteer at Teatro Salesian, and being a volunteer at Teatro Salesian, and I'm one of the administrators, it makes me liable to a certain extent, in the sense that I want to make sure, together with the team, and we have a very good team at the theatre, we want to make sure that the health of our patrons and our workers, I mean, everyone who steps into Teatro Salesian, are taken care of, because I mean, the last thing you would want is an accident. At the moment, the theatre is undergoing extensive renovations, and when we started the process, health and safety and accessibility were the top of our priority list.
Priorities.
So we even entrusted the health and safety reporting to a local company who specialises in the work. So we try and make sure that the step we're doing is a step in the right direction, taking into consideration that aspect. We're taking away equipment that was there for many, many years, especially stagecraft. The fly loft, for example, the structure that was right on top of the stage, we completely dismantled it and reinstalled a new one. Metal, fire retardant floors, stuff like that take care of that particular thing, which is health and safety.
Exactly.
Very important.
It's needed. It's
I
needed.
think if you're in any position of responsibility, that has to be one of your number one priorities. Because yes, A, you're liable, but B, also you don't want that to happen on your watch, right? Especially if you're in a position such as that, you're welcoming people into the place, or if you're on set and you're responsible for people on set, then you want to make sure that your crew and your cast are comfortable and they
Exactly.
feel safe and that there are no incidents, because that's, I mean, not not investing the time and the effort to make sure there's proper health and safety on set, to make sure that there's all the risk assessments in place, to make sure everyone has the information they need. If you don't do that, that's a false economy, in my view.
Exactly.
And what's interesting in all this is that, and it's funny, we just mentioned the theatre. I made it very clear that I'm a volunteer at the theatre only because it doesn't take professionals to be very cautious about these things. This is irrelevant of the level of skill set that you have. It's irrelevant of the number of years of experience that you have. It's irrelevant of who you are, what you do. This is a standard that everyone needs to abide by, because at the end of the day, if something happens to you, then you're taking it very seriously.
Exactly. In fact, kind of one of the other considerations usually especially when it comes to health and safety exercises is like its cost, right? Since it's an afterthought usually, there's a cost to it, but naturally then if a proper health and safety exercise is there, would have taken place, it's going to be avoiding a number of different consequences or potential consequences. So what is the actual cost of this exercise?
Well, it's a lot. It's a considerable amount of money. What I suggest, given that we're within an arts council, but this is wider than arts council as such. So I recall there was a push in the country for first aid, basic first aid. And all well and good, that's great. I mean, I just had a kid and we're going to do our first pediatric first aid course. Hopefully we'll never need to use it. But you come to a realization where now you're caring for someone else and you need to be equipped. I mean, you need to be equipped for whatever might happen. Hopefully it doesn't. So I think we should take the same frame of mind of first aid with health and safety. So even the little things, let's just be cautious of these things. And I think if together as industries, together as a society in general, if we consider the importance of health and safety and the approach of what we do and how we do it, be it from a film set to, I don't know, setting up decorations, feast decorations in the street. It's not the first time where health and safety, you need to shut an eye or two, or on a construction site, you know?
Yes.
Little things that if together as a society we do, I mean it's a wider discussion, but if we are cautious of these things and mindful, I think the list of victims would decrease.
In fact, I have, again, recently when doing some research ahead of the session, I read this, and I think it really makes sense, because then after something happens, it always kind of, you go back and say, but why did it happen? And it's not one thing. And I read this in a BBC article that quotes Simon and Cliff, saying that when tragedies occur, it's often not about one bad decision, but an accumulation of smaller mistakes that ultimately leads to a catastrophe. So this was in reference to the Astroworld festival. So
it's about checks and balances, right?
Exactly.
I mean, if everyone is following the same line, as you said, everyone's taking care of health and safety, there's going to be something's going to catch at one point, and someone's going to say, whoa, there's a mistake here, we need to remedy it. I mean, I know that, for example, obviously here locally, there's not many resources to make Maltese films. This is fact. And so it is very tempting to close an eye or two or three and say, we don't need this and we don't need this and why should we do this? It's cost so much money, you know, when you're struggling to survive and struggling to make the film in the first place.
Exactly. And I think that's kind of, it can be applied across board to other art forms as well.
Absolutely.
Kind of that comes at the very end of the process. And so you say that's an extra almost.
If you look at it as a cost.
If you look at
exactly.
If you look at it as an opportunity to avoid costs.
Exactly.
But yes,
it
is. But there is cost considerations. I mean, getting health and safety reports done and whatnot. There is
Yeah.
Yes.
There are
But
considerations.
it can save you so much on the back end, because the alternative, if something does happen, is so much worse than if you hadn't taken care of that to begin with. It's
Yeah.
all about preempting, it's sort of plan for the worst, hope for the best kind
Exactly.
of situation, which is a philosophy you should always take when you're creating anything of the sort, you know.
Exactly. And James, I would like to refer to the show reel which you kindly referred us to. And so in such a case, and in your profession, kind of how can visual effects in this sense help
Yeah.
to avoid certain
So
unfortunate instances?
on a film set, there are two departments, have similar names, and a lot of people mix them up. They're called special effects and visual effects.
And I'm doing that probably.
No,
Sorry.
you're not. You're fine. You're fine. You did before, but no.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Even the top producers, they mix them up. It's fine. So what is the difference? The difference is very simple. So imagine we have in the script, we have an explosion happening, right? So special effects is seeing the explosion on set. Visual effects is seeing nothing on set, but then seeing it in camera, as in we're seeing it in the final product. So visual effects is what you're adding in post-production
Okay.
by means of computer technology, etc., etc. It's a visual effect. So, and more often than not, what we do is we work in tandem with special effects. Like, for example, if there is an explosion, special effects would create a puff of smoke, and then visual effects will add flames, for example, as we'll see in the demo reel, in the show reel. Stunt rig work removal. So you'd have actors, they wouldn't be actors, they would be stunt doubles, jumping off a roof, for example, or in a car crash, and we replace faces, or we remove safety rigging, harnesses,
Okay.
or cranes. We take these, and I also put muzzle flashes in the show reel. You can put muzzle flashes, which when you shoot a gun, you get a flash just to show that the gun is actually working. You can do that in post-production. So there's no
Okay.
need on set. There is no need to shoot anything. You can shoot just air.
So
and that's
again,
it.
going back to what we said,
exactly.
it could
You could eliminate it. I
eliminate
mean,
that completely.
there are times where you would want to use blanks, so you get the reaction, the recoil.
Yeah.
That is nice. I mean, even the effect is very nice. But there's no need to take a risk of pointing a camera towards a camera, pointing a gun towards a camera and shooting it, as was the case in Rust. you
But
know?
would you decide that on the basis of budgets, or
No.
simply what you
It's safety.
want to
Yeah.
create?
It's safety.
It's safety.
It's safety 100%. It can be budget, but it's safety. I mean, if again, we go back to Rust. If for effect, you like the recoil of I mean, spend an hour or two training and then you're an actor at the end of the day, you know. Get yourself into the moment of the recoil when you shoot the gun. But if you're pointing a gun towards a crew, now again, I don't want to get into the merits of the project.
Exactly, of what happened.
I don't know what. What I do know is that there are always a means to avoid it, and visual effects is one of them.
Was one of them. So back to the case study and what was being reported as well, that hours before the shooting, members of the camera of the camera crew, walked off
away.
the set because of working conditions.
Yeah.
And I think one of the first reactions and things which were mentioned in relation to this particular accident was that the working conditions were not sufficiently good. There were several complaints, and this was something that led to this becoming a tragedy. So why would such a situation be so extreme, and does that reflect how the film industry operates in general?
We don't know whether the working conditions and working hours had any real direct impact on what happened later on. But we do know, of course, from what has been reported, that the camera crew had walked off sets that same morning.
Yeah.
We need to see that within the broader context of changes and union discussions which have been going on in the United States when it comes to working conditions. Because, of course, the working conditions of below-the-line crew on set have been and remain pretty unsustainable. I mean, people work a minimum of 12-hour days. The crew in question were complaining of short turnarounds, meaning
6-day weeks.
exactly 6-day weeks, meaning, of course, they don't have enough time from leaving set to having to get back to call time, to having to get back to set, essentially. They were complaining about the fact they weren't given accommodation close to the set, so they had to drive home exhausted. I mean, these are actually stories we've heard before. There have been incidents on other sets where people have had car crashes because they're so tired. There have been incidents on set as a result of a breakdown in the chain of command. There was I think a few years back, there was an accident where a young camera assistant actually got killed because she got run over by a train, right, on set. So, I mean, sets can be dangerous places to be, especially if there isn't the kind of the watchful eye of someone who has these considerations in mind. And when people are exhausted, when they are overwrought, when they are overworked, that's when accidents happen at the end of the day.
And why do you think this is a reality in general? I mean, why do you need to have such working conditions, especially?
Heat.
Do we have the time?
Exactly.
No, but yeah.
It's the thing is, this has been going on
Forever.
I can't
Forever.
remember a time when it hasn't been the case, particularly within the British and American systems, right? They do work generally a minimum of a 12-hour day. I mean, this happens with crews even come here, right?
12-hour day just for certain
exactly.
crews.
If you're lucky.
If you're lucky,
If you're
because
lucky.
if you're in production, for example, as a producer, production manager, coordinator, you're working more than 12 hours. More
So
than
it's kind of a standard that we have all.
It's a standard we've accepted.
You stop your life. Your life just stops.
Yeah.
And you dedicate 6 weeks or how long the shoot is to that particular project.
Yes, exactly.
But
And I mean, even if you're working a 6-day week, and even if you're working a minimum of 12-hour days, and I've worked as a production coordinator for many years. I have done my 12, my 14, my 16, even 18-hour days, you know, and it wipes you out. You can't do anything else. You have no life for that period of time.
And in fact, there seems to be even like it's across the cultural and creative industries in general. There seems to be now a reflection on what is happening in terms of working conditions. So I think there is that will to change things at this point.
I think there has to be a movement, because at the end of the day, even when you look at young people coming through, I mean, they're going to start questioning, why should I be stopping everything to, you know, to work in such conditions? I mean, I think there is going to be it started. These conversations had started many years before, then they were dropped, now they've been picked up. There seems to be quite a bit of a movement, obviously even fueled by social media. There are various Instagram accounts in the States, in the UK, even in Malta itself, talking about crew and crew conditions. I don't know, will we see any changes? I don't know, I mean, the jury's out.
It depends on what changes we're referring to as well.
Yes.
Because we can't use the argument, for example, of money on certain sets, because if you have the big American films, then let's not talk about money, because quite honestly, more often than not, people are taken care of.
Yeah.
You know, on American sets, for example, people are taken care of on set. You would have a caterer all the time there.
It also depends on
out food.
It depends on
the
who you are.
Oh, of course.
As well. Not everyone's taken care of in the same way.
Of course. But just to generalize, it might not be a question of money.
Money in this case. So not throwing money at the problem and kind of solving it.
Throwing money at the problem solves absolutely nothing. Throwing money at the problem, you know what gives you? A tragedy like Rust.
Yeah.
That's what gives you.
In what sense?
And in the sense that you can't find someone and just throw money at the first option you find, for example, that is available.
Okay.
For example.
Okay.
You know, where instead of thinking of, okay, what should I be doing?
Yeah.
You know, what is the chain of command, to use the same terminology that Rebecca is well, rightly so pointed out. What is that? How do we fix that? Do we have issues? So instead of throwing money at one end, for example, having blanks on set, you just use that money to get, for example, a visual effects house to do it in post, for example. You know?
So it's just
certain
planning
decisions,
and
it's planning,
readdressing.
certain decisions.
Yeah.
For example, again, I'm not going to get into the merits of the project because we're not part of it. I mean, we are
Yeah.
not part of it.
Mhm.
But it's not just money. And a point I wanted to mention about the long hours on film sets. I work in visual effects, so more often than not, our work is at the end of the of the shoot day. So we're at the end.
Yeah.
because people are not seeing the work, so we just put it at the end. You know, the last 5 minutes we have to shoot everything. We're used to that. But working long hours is part, and I'm going to say this. You're going to jump on me. It's part of the beauty of it. And I see it in theatre as well, where back when I was more involved in the theatre making aspect, I used to get a lot of notifications on my phone from my now wife asking me when I'm coming home. You just get engulfed in it,
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
and it's part of the beauty of it. It's
That's true.
it's
It's
sad.
addictive.
It's
I remember when
addictive.
I first started, a colleague had told me, be careful what you're getting into because you're going to find it to be addictive. And it is. And the long hours, there is obviously that positive side to it in the sense that you're with people who are of like mind, you make firm friends, you know, who are steady friends for a very long time. I count as some of my dearest friends, people I've met through work on, you know, in the office, on production and set, etc. And people I respect immensely. They're fantastic individuals. So there's definitely that feeling of you're in it together. It's really exciting. You're away from the world. The world doesn't really exist. Only you exist in that moment, in that space and time.
It's a
And that is
bubble
intoxicating. It's a bubble, yes.
And back to working conditions. So, what would be the role of unions, associations in this case? How can they help such situations?
Well, I mean, obviously, unions can campaign for unity across the board and can make sure that sort of to make sure that there's a sense that everyone is on the same page. So, I mean, you don't end up in a situation, and this is what the problem is, sort of, oh, you don't like the conditions? Okay, we just find someone else. So you don't have that situation because obviously if you hire someone non-union, which is apparently what happened allegedly on Rust, they hired non-union members as well to replace union members. I mean, there can be penalties and that can be a cost which is greater than the risk, you know, that is taken essentially.
It's standards, and locally, we don't have any
We don't
unions.
have, no.
We don't have any unions. Sometimes you would find producers asking for a certain breed of crew. So whenever you mention unions, now I don't know about your experience, but sometimes when you mention unions, there's that dark cloud on top, because again, going back to giving yourself engulfing to the project, sometimes you expect that from people, but certain crews might not give you that, because at the end of the day, they're looking at a job. Fair enough.
Yeah.
You know, but it might cause a bit of tension.
But I think it's about longevity, right? If you want the best crew to work with you for the longest time possible, you have to, of course, treat them well, and you have to give them the respect they deserve. And as time goes on, that crew will have different priorities in their personal life. So they will not perhaps be able to put all their lives on hold. Like imagine if they have a family, for instance, so on and so forth. You have to take that into consideration.
Exactly.
It's also as a fact that women find it increasingly hard to stay in the film industry, for instance, because of course family-friendly measures do not really exist.
Exactly,
you
those
know?
long hours away from home.
Yes, it's extremely hard.
Yeah, and about this specific subject, working conditions, we also spoke to Anita De Beer, who is the director of Pearl, an association acting as the voice of music, performing arts and live performance organizations in general. We spoke to Anita about working conditions in Europe and beyond. Anita, working conditions for practitioners in the cultural and creative industries, including health and safety issues, have been recently the focus of conversations, studies, discussions in recent months. Why do we speak of poor working conditions, and how is this linked to having hazardous working places?
Yeah, well, of course, the pandemic has triggered a lot of attention to the situation of artists and other cultural workers in the sector. because of the fact that a lot of them work on project basis, and of course that there was not a fallback by governments for providing social protection or support. And that really has highlighted the way in which sectors like the live performance, music, but also audiovisual sector, how they work, how people really are working from assignment to assignment, from project to project, from one to the other. And for which there have, of course, to be mechanisms in place that when people are not that moment in work or having their income, that of course during those gaps somehow they should be able to fall back on some kind of the safety nets that are there, and of which we say that Europe is so famous, the social Europe. Where are they and how is it put in place? And there are good examples from different countries, of course, where there exist certain systems, like for unemployment support when you are not. So the famous system in France, intermittent de spectacle, but which also exists in a kind of similar form in Belgium. Others, like in Germany, where there is a social security fund also for self-employed. So all these systems depend very much on how it is established in the different countries, which makes that there is a big disbalance across Europe. And that in certain countries there's really a lack of good support, and in other countries there's, let's say, a matured support mechanism that has been established. It's never perfect, but at least, where there exists something, at least artists are in a somewhat safer condition. The other thing is also that live performance is a sector that is heavily financed, that relies on public funding, on public support, because of the labor intensity of what it produces. It's the people who are the human capital. And where we see that since the financial crisis in a lot of countries, subsidies have not gone up. In the good situation, they kind of stayed the same, but the life costs have gone up. So it means that there is a situation, and that is, of course, why we see that shift also to that project work, is that there is not enough money in circulating. And then, of course, people want to take the jobs even at a lower wage, which shouldn't be the case. I mean, this is something that has come clear in the pandemic. And where this has to change. The support also for government should be in line with what are decent wages in the sector. Now, there are, of course, collective agreements on wages in a lot of countries, so which provide a framework on what are the minimum wages according to your function or activity. But we see when we compare it with other sectors, we are on the lower edge. Hotels, restaurants, perhaps we are a bit in that same situation. But yeah, more has to be or should be able to be done in order to give people the right support and the right a decent living, of course. And so that's a whole macroeconomic situation in which we find ourselves today, and which is very much debated, also has been debated in the European Parliament, will be debated also with member state representatives. So it's very much on the agenda. I'm glad that politicians take it on the agenda, because we've been calling for a lot of more support in the past, and our voice was very little heard, but now, hopefully it will come.
What is being proposed in terms of solutions, also in terms of legislation, and what is the way forward at a European level?
Well, we must say that Europe has already a lot of legislation that applies on employment issues. It has fixed very strong rules, like working time is to be limited. When we prepared this, we were talking about 2 long hours. Well, it's not possible. I mean, there are specific rules. There is a working time directive that says you're only allowed to work 48 hours in average per week. Of course, this can be matched according to the sectors or peak periods, and it also requires rest periods and breaks and at least 1 day per week of rest. So it's very, very precise and clearly defined. And it's something that already exists for many years. The question is to which extent it is applied often in our sector. But yeah, if there is a trespassing of the rules, I mean, people can take the employer to court, and of course that could be discussed. Also in the field of health and safety, of the protection of people, there's now a work-life balance directive that has been voted on, allowing people to take parental leave. Of course, maternity leave was already in the law, but it's part of it. Carers leave also, so when you take care of an older person or have a child who is sick during a certain period and needs specific care. So these are things that Europe is very kind of I should say, an initiator, a leader in the world, and where we have very established rules that have to be followed and that have to be implemented and there. So the health and safety regulations are very much about protecting the workers, with obligations on the employers, and of course, yeah, the communication and the collaboration that has to happen in the organization or in the company itself. The thing is often that we think because we are in the cultural sector that certain things do not apply to us, or we think that because of artistic reasons, yes, it could be, and that if that notion is still existing, then I think it's not acceptable anymore. We are in the year 2021. We should know, even if it's an artistic production and it has a specific scope, we still live in an environment where we should obey by laws and by rules, and we should follow those rules as they are set. And it is unacceptable if the artistic directors would go beyond that. I mean, the safety is the first priority of the people. So I think, yeah, that is an important message I always like to carry out.
Okay, so way forward, how can we integrate health and safety within the planning stage? We have mentioned this, kind of it's important that this is not an afterthought, this is part of the planning. So how can we do that more efficiently and more effectively?
I think one, educate through education, educating crews, making sure that obviously the management, line producers, so on and so forth, have that as a priority. I think obviously making people aware of, let's be honest, the penalties and the risks if they don't follow the guidelines, if they don't follow regulations, and if they don't take care of the situation as it is on set. I think that's a first start. So I would say education, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, to tie with that, I mean, maybe reducing certain bureaucracy, and you don't reduce health and safety to just filling out forms and papers and creating risk matrices and
yes,
familiar with them.
you know, I mean, yeah, I don't know that about I know what goes into the film industry in that respect, but you're very much aware of what happens in the theatre. Believe me, when you have 300 people inside the theatre.
And it has become
And
even
the
more
afterthought,
complex
it's
now
way more complex.
in this
It's
context.
good.
It's good.
And that's why you
it-
end up getting people to do certain jobs as well.
Exactly, exactly. And I think this, I mean, if we had to really like find a positive thing in this whole mess of COVID, I think it did make us reflect on this subject a little bit more. And even though there are more forms to fill and more complications and
Oh,
to
you
planning.
opened the door,
And
Elaine.
more
You know.
expensive.
I
You
did,
opened the
I'm
big
opening
door.
it wide.
COVID has shown us that, and this is my experience, that certain decisions are taken without even thinking about them. Certain policies are done without us considering what are we doing. And it's very, very clear. It's very clear. It's, I mean, a simple thing, for example, going to a public place and whoever tells you to fill out a form just because you arrived to register and everyone's using the same pen.
Yes.
You know? Logic. You know? So it's the same thing with health and safety. It's the same thing. If you reduce policies to just ticking boxes and we're doing this just because we need to do this, then I think you would lose the whole point of doing it.
Exactly.
That's why I mentioned first aid. Why? Because first aid, if something happens to you, that's the first thing you would do. Because it affects you. So if we instill the idea that our education towards health and safety needs to be on par with first aid, how important it is, because anything might happen. Someone might trip in front of you and start choking and potentially die in front of you. If we take the same approach and the same vigor of learning, because it's very important, then I think would be in a way better situation.
Yes.
And I think if we do that, so education, but starting them young, starting them young, like kids at school, maybe it's raining, be cautious. Okay, if it's raining, don't rush inside. There's a mat. Everyone makes sure that they clean their shoes because you might slip and just fall down the stairs. Something as little as that. But at least if we're cautious as a society, I keep on saying society, because at the end of the day, it's irrelevant who you are and what you do.
Yeah, and you will carry that with you to work, to your
Exactly.
professional life,
At home.
at home in general, yes. And naturally that will become very much part of the process, of the planning process as well, no? Because again, it boils down to this, we already tackled this, but making health and safety economically viable in this case is relevant, obviously, and again, you're going to be planning this together with your role, with the other budget items, I would say.
It's about conscientiousness as well. So I think tying into what you were saying, just because you've always done something a certain way doesn't mean that's the best way to do it and that's what you should be continuing to do. So I think even in terms of taking a step back, even within theatre, within film, taking a step back and looking what is needed for this specific project, how can I make sure I have all my bases covered, how can I make sure my crew is going to be safe and secure, and I think those are some of the first questions that can be asked by the producing team.
Exactly. And on that note, we have to conclude today's session. Thank you very much, Rebecca. Thank you, James, for being here today. Thank you all for following this conversation. Feel free to leave any comments, any questions you might have in the comment section. Thank you, Arts Council Malta, for hosting this ACM Hangouts. And we do hope that you found the session to be engaging and informative and that you'll join us for the next session. Thank you.